All right, the next step is going to be using our fleshing machine and the wire wheel on the machine to remove the rest of the meat and the fat and everything from in between the feather quills. I want to touch a little bit on the machine. This is a bird fleshing machine you can buy at Mackenzie or Van Dyke's. There's a lot of different machines on the market. This is just the one that we use. All of them work just as good. This does come with its own plastic cover. We find it's easier though to use bubble wrap because you can replace it in between jobs and it just makes the cleanup go a little bit easier. But they do come with their own plexiglass shielding. This is a wheel that we've been using for probably the last 6-7 years. It's done thousands of birds, so it's pretty worn down. The wheels that come with these machines are quite a bit bigger and wider. They will work. This is just one we've been using for a long time. I like to keep some tools on hand. I like to keep my scissors and scalpel ready to go, so as I'm using the machine, if I see an area, I can quick go in and remove some excess meat. Before I wheel the bird, I like to spray it down good. This is just going to keep it hydrated and stop it from drying out during the wheeling process. It also helps, this is cold water. It also helps to keep the bird cool because sometimes it can heat up from the wire wheel hitting it. And then I also use borax as my medium for fleshing. You can use corncob grit for this as well, or you can use a mixture of the two. I just like using regular powdered borax. I find that that really grabs onto the meat and the fat good, and it helps to absorb all the fat and grease that's going to be coming off of this when we wheel it off. So to start, we will put a liberal amount of borax onto the bird. Just going to start to rub that in. We'll put a little bit more, and then what I'll be doing is I'm fleshing, I'll be coming down and grabbing more of this borax and rubbing it into different areas. To flesh this, we're going to be starting at the head, and we're going to be fleshing around the head, and we're going to be paying close attention again to these feather butt areas. We want to get this nice and clean so our crown dries nicely. And then we're going to be working down the bird. So what I'll do is I'll flesh the head, and I'll flesh the entire neck on all sides, and then I'll do one breast side at a time. So I'll come through and I'll flesh this side all the way down to the vent, then I'll come back and I'll flesh this side all the way down to the vent. And then I'll come in and I'll clean up the back. And after we get that done, we'll come through and flesh around the vent and the tail. Then we'll flesh the leg bones, and then we'll finish up by fleshing the wing bones and fleshing the secondary quills out. Put a little bit more borax on the head, and we'll start fleshing it. Now when you're fleshing, and you want to be presenting this to the wheel, so we'll be coming up like this, and you don't want to, ram it into the wheel. It takes a feel to know just how to hold the skin, but you just want to be gently putting the skin on, let the wheel do the work, and remove the meat. The same with other parts of the body. Like right in here, we'll be coming in like this, just gently right on the wheel. You don't want to pull this in, you don't want to push it into the wheel really hard, otherwise you'll start burning in holes. You also want to make sure that nothing gets caught on the wheel or behind the wheel on this shaft. It usually isn't a big problem, but if you're fleshing and all of a sudden you catch on these feathers, you'll start to rip this bird like this, and it'll wrap around it and make big rips and holes. And just present it to the wheel. Starting up by the head. Just very carefully. I have my finger underneath it. Everywhere I'm fleshing, my finger's right underneath it, giving me good feel, so I know exactly where that wheel is hitting this skin. And I'm not presenting too much of this skin to the wheel at one time, or else you risk too much of a chance of tearing. Just fleshing right around, coming up to this back crown area. You want to spread this out, smooth this out, get your finger underneath, and start fleshing this. Now if you can zoom in on this, these feather quills here, all the gunk and the grease and the fat has been removed from it. So this is finished fleshed. This area right here we haven't touched yet. You can see that buildup, but this is how you want it to look. All the fleshings have been removed from around those quills, so they have lots of room to move. I'm going to do this whole crown area right away just to get it out of the way. That way I make sure I don't forget to do it. Take your time, it's not a race. Just make sure that you want to make sure that when you're fleshing, you flesh an area complete. You don't want to have to come back later on. So if you flesh a spot, you flesh it and move on to the next. You don't want to have to come back. You run too much of a chance of putting in holes and you lose track of where you are. So we've completely fleshed out this whole crown area. You can see these are all separated. You can run your finger along them and you can feel the feather quills. That's what you want. So that's done, and we can move on to the rest of the head and start working our way down the neck. This fleshing procedure is the same for pretty much every bird. The neck is probably one of the trickiest spots to get the meat from, to get the meat off of, as the meat's on there pretty tough. You just have to take your time and make sure you get it all off. Just like that. That's perfectly clean. As you can see, there's some shot hole damage here. We want to take care when we're fleshing this area out. It's going to be easy to open these up bigger than they are. We got a few bullet holes here, and we have some bullet holes here. Or these could even be from dogs grabbing it. So those are areas that we want to pay close attention to. Take a little bit of extra time fleshing around them. Also, anytime you see a hole like this, you want to make a mental note of where that hole is, because there's a very strong chance that there's a bunch of blood clotted in the feathers on the show side of this. Right down here by these feather roots, there'll be a bunch of blood clots. So remember where this is, or anywhere else on the bird you find these. You're going to want to take extra time washing that area. I'm going to put on a little bit more borax just to give myself some traction and help catch any of this fat that we're pulling off. On a real greasy, real fatty wood duck, or any real fatty bird, you'll have a lot of liquid fat coming off of this from when you flesh it off, a lot of times it liquefies. So that's why you need the borax to help absorb that and keep it off of your feathers. So this is an area that we just fleshed on the breast. We've removed all of the fat and membranes from around it, or at least 99% of it. There will always be a little bit left right at the base of those feather quills that you'll never get out. But you want to get 99% of that fat out. If you don't remove all of this fat, this is going to bleed grease on your finished mount. So you'll have a bunch of grease coming out of the feathers, and it's not going to look good, and you have to throw your mount out. So you want to make sure that you work hard to get all of this fat off of all the feathers everywhere. You want it to look right like this here. When we're fleshing on both sides of the breast, you have feather quills coming up, and then you have this area here where there's no feather quills. This is very thin. So when you hit this area, you're going to want to take your time and make sure that you get everything off, but you don't start putting holes through it. All right, so we've fleshed this area out, and this is that thin spot right in between where those two feather groups meet. That's been cleaned as well. This is real thin, so it's easy to put holes in this. But this is what it should look like, all finished up. I'm going to remove a little bit more fat from here because I don't like how that looks, a little bit too much. There, we've just cleaned that area up. You can feel around, you can feel those feather butts nicely. Everything's been removed. So now I'm going to pretty much come straight down this whole side and flesh right down to the vent. So I'm going to work my way down the whole thing. I'm going to put a little bit more borax on it to give myself some traction. It's okay to get borax on these feathers. That helps keep that liquid grease off of them. You want to be careful when you get to this seam line. A lot of times your wheel is going to want to try to catch these feathers and it's going to rip. You're going to get big holes and rips and tears in your skin. So you want to take your fingers and pull those feathers back and grab onto your skin. Make sure that there's no feathers near this wheel. And just gently and carefully present this up here to the wheel. That's going to stop everything from winding up on you. And this is actually a very difficult wood duck to flesh. If they have a little bit more fat, they flesh a lot easier. This fat is so tight on these feather quills that I have to use a lot more force, and it really greatens the chance of me putting holes in this entire thing. So you just have to really take your time. Right along here on your breast, you have your side pocket feathers. And these are these feathers right here. You want to make sure that you flesh in between those very well so when you're mounting them, they stack and layer nicely. Going to continue working my way down towards the vent. If you feel your skin starting to heat up too much, you can come through with your spray bottle, which is full of cold water, and just spray that down. That's going to cool the skin down. And also keep it from drying out. Put a little bit more of this borax up here. This vent area is very weak. It can be tricky to flesh, so you really want to just gently apply your skin to the wheel. Just enough pressure so you can start to remove this fatty membrane. If you do start to put holes in, they can be sewed up, so it's not the end of the world. If you're a bird taxidermist, you're probably going to be putting in quite a few holes. It does happen. You just have to sew them up, and you want to do whatever you can to minimize it. Because a lot of times these holes can be difficult to hide. Come down here onto the vent area. Very carefully, very slowly flesh this area out. It's super thin, especially on a wood duck. Some birds are more forgiving, like diver ducks. You can really beat those around on here, but any kind of a puddle duck, like wood ducks or teal or mallards, you really want to take your time and be careful down here. Coming right up to by this tail. We'll flesh the tail out when we do the back. Right now we're just kind of getting up here. Just going to kind of come back through here and look for any spots that I might have missed. Carefully along this seam line. Right, so now we have this side completely fleshed out. We're going to go ahead and repeat the process on the other side. All right, so we fleshed down the other side as well of the breast. Now we're going to start working around this vent area, and we're going to clean off the tail. And then we're going to move on to the back. So this whole area right in here is incredibly weak. Actually, the whole area right around this tail is incredibly weak. So we want to take our time and just go slow and carefully flesh this out. We're fleshing right around the vent, coming up to the tail. We'll start cleaning off these quills. There's actually a little shelf right here where there's another layer of feathers. So we want to make sure we clean that off as well. Just going to clean up a little bit more right around this vent. We're going to keep this vent skin on here though until right before we mount it. I just want to flesh right around it. You want to get all the fat removed from around it. So you just want a little bit of this meaty tissue left, but no fat. We kind of start working our way around. If you remember, we cut this hole in here. That was to remove that oil gland feather. So that's an area that we're going to want to go slowly around because it's an existing hole and might want to rip when we start fleshing around it. Coming up the side of the tail. I'm going to hit these tail quills again. You can see they're starting to separate and open up. You want to make sure that all the meat and gunk and fat is removed. If you don't get it all out, your tail isn't going to display out nice. It's going to want to distort. First, it's not going to display out right when you're mounting it, and then secondly, as it dries, it's going to start going like this instead of being nice and flat like this. Again, as you can see, there's a little layer of feathers that run along the top side as well. Those are the feathers that lay over the tail. We want to make sure that we flesh that area out as well and kind of get down in between them. Gonna check this out, see how we're doing. All right, we did the other side of the back. Now we're gonna start working on these leg bones. I'm just going to come and clean them off. That's all I'm doing. Removing any bit of the excess meat that was on them. And these leg bones are actually filled up with marrow. And if you don't clean this marrow out, there's a strong chance that all this grease and marrow that's in here, the bone marrow, is going to come down and leak onto your foot over time. And it's going to cause your foot to be greasy. So we're going to want to get that marrow out. And there's a couple ways we can do that. We can either take a drill and drill through the top of this. We could, but normally what I do, I just take my scissors and I just cut the top of the knuckle off, right like that. And you can see all that marrow in there. When we hit the washing process, I'll take a wire and run it down here and clean that out. Now that we have the legs done, we'll come up and work on these wing areas. So what we want to do is we want to clean all the gunk and meat out from the secondaries, and we want to clean this wing bone up and kind of flesh around the wing any little bit of meat scraps that might be on it. You really want to get in this corner here good. That's an easy spot to miss. Basically, removing all of this meat and all this fat, etc., is going to give us our secondaries a lot of breathing room, and we'll be able to manipulate everything very nicely on the finished mount. Add a little bit of borax to this. We can take our scissors and trim off some of this hard to flesh off tendons and ligaments. Now we're going to just clean up around the wing itself, making sure there's no tendons or ligaments or little bits of meat or fat on the wing. And now we have this wing completely cleaned and ready to wash. Now that we have the bird completely fleshed, we're going to start with the washing process. It's important that we wash all of the grease and fat and everything off of the skin and off of all the feathers. The setup that we're going to be using is this plastic tub. This is really convenient for washing small birds like this. This is our normal sink that we would also use. This is a double wash barrel sink, a wash basin sink. It's got a spray hose attachment. But for this case, we're going to be using this nice plastic tub. It's real easy to get in here on a smaller bird. The first thing that I want to do is put a small amount of water in here, just enough to slightly dampen the bird. And now I'm going to use Dawn dish soap. This is the professional quality. It's a little bit stronger than your average everyday homeowner quality, but homeowner quality will work. And I'm going to put some of this right on the bird skin itself. And what I want to do is I want to rub this soap into all of these feather quill areas. Basically the entire skin side of this bird, I want to have a layer of this soap on it. And what this is going to do is it's going to help to bust up any grease or fat that's on here and help to clean the bird, wash the skin, wash the feathers, and just gets rid of a lot. When you're doing this, you can also be looking for areas that you might have missed when you were fleshing, and you can quick come through with your scissors or take it back to the machine and quick clean up an area. After we have this all rubbed in, we will add some more water. Now this water here, I would say it's a little bit warmer than lukewarm. You don't want the water to be too hot, otherwise you might start to slip the feathers out, but you want it to be slightly warm. And we're just going to start to agitate and kind of wash this bird in this water. This will be our first wash cycle. At this time, if you remember during the other course, we had cut the knuckles off of these leg bones, and this is still full of bone marrow. We need to remove that. So we're going to take a wire. This is just a 16 gauge wire. The diameter of your wire will vary depending on the size of your leg bone. We're just going to run this right down into the leg. That's going to pull out all this marrow that you see here. So rinse that off in the water. That one's done. We'll do the next side. Push that out. Rinse it a little bit. Do it again. You just want to get all that out. If you don't remove the marrow, it's going to bleed grease out onto the foot. And you're going to get a sticky foot, or you have a lot of grease bleeding down it later on in the mount's life. All right, now that we have the skin side thoroughly washed, we're going to flip it so the back's in the water, and we're going to start to re-pull out or re-invert the tail, the legs, and the wings. So we're just going to pull them out from where they were before when we cased them out. Same with the neck. Now, because we want to wash the feather side of the skin now. Want to start working on getting all those blood clots out, a lot of the dirt, and anything else that might be on the feathers. Grease and fat, etc. Gonna agitate this around a little bit. When you pull the bird out of the water, you want to cradle it out, and you want to get a hand down by the tail area and pull it out in one. You don't want to quick jerk it out from the top because there's a chance you might rip the delicate tail area skin. Squeegee some of this dirty water out. We'll temporarily set this aside and we'll do a water change. This will be our second wash. This is going to be another soap wash. Again, this water is slightly warm. We're going to add a little bit more soap. Now, depending on the amount of dried in blood and dirt, etc., that's on your bird skin, it doesn't hurt to let the bird soak in cooler water, just lukewarm water for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Definitely not hot water. And what that's going to do is that's going to help to loosen up some of that debris that's in there. So we'll just, with the feather side out, we'll just kind of open it up and let that soak in there for approximately 5 minutes, just to start to soften all those areas up. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes or so. We're going to agitate this bird around a little bit, and we're going to do a water change on it. This is all the soak time it's going to need. It didn't really have that much dried in blood. It had quite a bit of dirt on its belly just from carrying it around out in the field. Squeegee it out, set it aside, and we'll do a water change. This next water batch is going to be another warm water rinse. We won't be adding any more soap. We'll just be rinsing now. And again, this is just warm water, not hot, just warm. You want to make sure that you get all of the soap out of the feathers. If you don't, you're going to have a greasy, ratty looking bird. You also want to make sure that you get all the grease out as well, which is why we use the Dawn soap, because it cuts the grease. As I'm washing, I'm going through the feathers looking for any potential blood clots or things like that, fat chunks that might be trapped inside the feathers. Any spot that you might have to do a little bit more thorough cleaning on. This one looks really nice though. If you do have an area, especially on the back, if it's all shot up, you'll a lot of times have a lot of blood clots, and they can be hard to wash out. And after you get the bird dried, you're going to have kind of a greasy, ratty looking back in certain areas. So if you see that, you can actually use a sprayer like this and lift the back skin out of the water and spray those clots out carefully. All right, this rinse is completed. We'll take the bird out and give it another rinse. And with each rinse, we're going to be getting the water colder and colder till our final rinse is going to be very cold water. That helps to displace any remaining soap. So we're just filling this up again for another rinse, make it a little bit colder this time. So we're going to do this rinse and then probably another one after this as well. I'd recommend doing 2 more. That's just going to really make sure we get all the soap out of this and any additional grease that might be somewhere on it. At about this time, I normally like to do a little bit of wing injection. And down by the wrist, in the last bone, they have a small amount of meat. And you can either cut that out or you can inject it. If you're going to inject it like we are now, you want to do it during your final rinsing cycle. So that way if any of this leaks back out onto the feathers, you can wash it out. And we're just using bird feed injection fluid. It's a standard preservative made by Knobloch's. And we're just going to inject a small amount right into that fleshy area of that wingtip. We'll repeat that on the other side as well. And again, if there's any little bit runs out of your injection hole, the water that we're using right now is going to wash it right off the feathers. Squeegee this out. You want to be careful when you're squeegeeing. You don't want to be pulling down. You just want to kind of squeegee in place. If you start pulling like this, you might tear the tail off or cause other reps elsewhere on the bird. So as you can see in our water here, it's starting to get pretty clean, but we still have some soap residue floating around. So we're definitely going to want to do one more rinse. Wash the bucket out good. Now that we have our final wash complete and the bird's been completely rinsed, there's no more soap floating around in the bucket, there's no more bloody water, it's real nice, clean, clear water. We can either move on to the water displacement and drying process, or we could freeze the bird at this time.